what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to look at this idea that we're individuals who have rationality and we're capable of morality and we have free will. And I want to, in these 9 minutes, just undermine that idea and show how psychology has really kind of attacked that idea. And then if I have enough time, I'm going to show how actually, that idea is still, valid instead. Okay, we've got the idea of the self that is capable of making rational choices from Greek philosophy. So you have the famous metaphor in Plato of reason being like a rider in a chariot and steering the chariot of our passions. So that's where we got this, Buddha talks about reason being like a rider on an elephant, on the elephant of our kind of psyche and our passions. What psychology has shown us in the last 30 years is that the elephant is really big and the rider is really small and constantly falling asleep. So the elephant tends to run off and do its own thing. In psychology, this is called the dual processor theory of the mind. It originated in Greek philosophy, and what it means is that our mind has two different mechanisms. We have a conscious, reflective, rational mechanism, which thinks through things, which can think about our thoughts and so on. And then we have another mechanism which is automatic, emotional, and intuitive, and it doesn't really think things through. It responds much more instinctively, emotionally, quickly, and rapidly. And the automatic, emotional, intuitive system is older. They think it's in older bits of our brain. It evolved to help us survive in very threatening, primitive environments like the Serengeti. So if there was a lion or a tiger near us, our automatic system would go tiger, and immediately we'd run away or fight if we were brave or something. But and it did a good job. It kept us alive. It helped us survive by giving us these quick, shocking bursts of information. But it's not necessarily so useful at helping us to live in a more complex environment like it's grown up in the last 500 years, because its interpretations that it makes of the environment are too simplistic. They're too excitable, they're too emotional, they're too hysterical. So what psychology has found in the last 30 or 40 years is how much of our thinking happens through the automatic system as opposed to the conscious reflective system. Psychologists now think that almost all our thinking happens through the automatic system. We hardly ever use our conscious rational system. I think about 99% perhaps comes through the automatic system. Now this causes a lot of our problems because the automatic system makes these kind of rapid assessments of our environment which aren't often right. So cognitive psychology has looked at this a lot. They call it cognitive distortions, which is how our mind misinterprets reality. So the theory behind cognitive behavioral therapy is that most of our emotional disorders, like depression or anxiety, are caused by misinterpreting reality, misreading it, by using our automatic mind to kind of jump to conclusions and get things wrong and then feel bad as a result. So CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, has looked at about 10 cognitive distortions that people typically make that lead to things like depression and anxiety. They're things like catastrophizing, always thinking that it's the end of the world, jumping to conclusions, magnifying the bad, thinking that because we feel something, therefore it's true. So it's an automatic mind that's messing us up and making us think kind of irrationally. Another bit of cognitive psychology is behavioral economics. They've applied a similar field, but to economics. Classical economics is based on the idea that humans are rational and capable of making these kind of rational economic decisions. What behavioral economics has done is looked at how actually most of our economic decisions are irrational. We make crazy decisions most of the time, as we've seen through the credit crunch. So they've also looked at these kind of cognitive biases that people, investors, typically make. There are things like the attention bias. For example, one study found that investors were much more likely to buy a stock that had recently been mentioned in the news in the last day or two. Even if the news had been negative about the stock, they're still much more likely to buy it. The reason is our automatic system can't cope with that much information, so it just picks out certain things. If there's a name on CNN, we're more likely to buy that stock. There's the self-confirmatory bias, which is that we tend to look for evidence that confirms our belief and ignore any other evidence that doesn't fit with our theory of the world. There's the framing bias. We are the choices we make very much depend on the frame in which we presented that choice. So we're much more likely to buy a sausage if it's advertised as 75% real meat than if it's advertised as 25% fat, for example. There's the herd bias. If we're surrounded by investors and analysts and journalists all telling us that this market's never going to go down, we're much more likely to kind of get caught up in that exuberance. We're very much herd animals. And there's the conformity bias, which is that if everyone else says something, we're more likely to say it ourselves. A psychologist called Solomon Asch showed this in the 1950s. He held up a piece of paper with a line on it and lots of other lines, and a person had to say which line was like the other line, which was the same kind of size. And there was one line in these groups that was very obviously the same size as the left line. And when individuals did it on their own, they could easily pick out which line was the same size. But then they did it in a group with one volunteer and, unbeknownst to him, 5 actors. And all the other 5 actors picked one of these lines. It was a wrong line, said, yes, definitely that one. Next one, definitely that one. Next one, definitely that one. And it came to the volunteer and was like, yeah, definitely that one too. Because, you know, we go along with what other people are saying, because we think, well, I must be wrong, they must be right. So that's called the conformity bias. And that gives an example of where one of the pressures we're exposed to, one of the things that impinges on our ability to make free, rational decisions, is social pressures. We don't make, it's not like our brains are in some vat separated from our context. Actually, they're very much embodied in our actual bodies and in social situations, and they very much direct the kind of decisions that we take. So this in psychology is a field called situationist psychology, which is looking at the role of context and situations in the decisions and the moral decisions that we make. So, for example, the recent experiment found that how likely are we to give change to someone in the street? We're pretty unlikely. Most people walk past. But if you put that person outside a bakery and the air is full of the smell of cookies, then we're much more likely to feel benevolent and give that person change. How likely are we to help a person if they drop their papers in the street? Very unlikely. 1 in 25 people helped a lady if she dropped her paper in the street. But then what they did was they put change in a phone box nearby and saw how likely was someone to help the woman pick up her papers if they just found change in the phone box. Very likely. 6 out of 7 people who just found change in the phone box then went to help the lady pick up her papers. Those are examples of how a situation can nudge someone towards acting morally and benevolently. It can happen the opposite way. A study in the 1970s took some religious studies students from Princeton and asked them to study the Good Samaritan parable, and then told them to go across town to a meeting. On the way, they passed someone who was an actor who was pretending to be in deep distress. Now, half of the group, they told that they were late for this appointment across town, so they should hurry. That group was much less likely to stop for this person in deep distress, even though they'd just been studying the Good Samaritan parable. And you can show that these situationist pressures can actually be quite strong and quite powerful and lead us to do quite bad things. So there were 2 famous experiments in the 1970s, situationist experiments, which you guys might have heard of. The first was by Stanley Milgram, who was a Jewish emigre from Europe. His family had fled Europe in World War II. And he was wondering why did so much of Germany go along with the Nazis? Were they just rotten to the core, or were they just kind of going along the situation? So he did an experiment. He got volunteers into a room and said, now you're going to be testing out how well someone remembers something. There was someone else behind a glass screen, and they said, we're going to test this person here, how good his memory is. If he fails in a memory test, I want you to give him an electric shock. Unbeknownst to them, the person behind the glass screen was an actor. And the guy always got it wrong, so he was constantly getting shocked. But he wasn't actually getting shocked, he was an actor. So the first shock was like 100 volts. The guy was obviously in pain, he was kind of screaming and yelping. Then, some people said, are you sure we should go on? And the person would say, no, go on, you must go on. Then the voltage got up to like 350 watts. At this point, the guy was begging them, please stop this experiment, please stop, this is outrageous. And the person would still say, you've got to go on, you must go on, you have no choice. Then